using the live feed. So I always apologize. I didn't have a chance to make nice and pretty source sheets. And unfortunately, it's hard to learn when you just have really a lot of material in front of you, but you have a lot of material in front of you. And now I will put a lot of material in front of the people online. Hi, everybody. Thanks again for joining us. I know that I want everyone to be here in person if possible. I love that, but I also know it's a very icy day and there are other things going on. So I'm very grateful that we can at least be together in this way. And so thank you. Remember, it'll help me if you put questions or comments. It doesn't have to be a question. You can just decide what it is that you're passionate about, put it in there. Like last time, I'm going to take you through a responsum by Rabbi Grodowski, who I believe is Orthodox. He's not a conservative decisor. And on the issue of opening and closing the Torah scroll for an Aliyah, I gave a sermon about it about 2 years ago, but I didn't show you the sources, but I talked about them and we'll try to do it now. One of the biggest issues in halakha, and it's something I'd like everyone to get to see, is you have a question. It looks like there's a really clear answer in a halachic or Talmudic text, but you don't know what the context is. And a lot of what the Talmud's doing with the Mishnah and the later, the medieval commentators on the Talmud and the Tosafot and Rashi, what's the context of what they're talking about? And it's very easy to be fooled. So like last week, it happens a lot. What we started with is, I said, can I have Motown Shabbat? Can I have Beatles Shabbat? Can I have Simon and Garfunkel Shabbat? Am I allowed to take prayers and put them to Scarborough Fair? Can I sing L'chadodi to Scarborough Fair, Adon Olam to something? And it seems pretty straightforward. You open up the Talmud and it says, Shaliach Tzibor, one leading the service. They're disqualified if they sing love songs, right? Okay. Pretty clear, right? Except when you actually read, when you get into the sources, you realize that they're talking about someone who basically it's the jazz singer. They're talking about someone who sings love songs in a tavern, is someone who you don't really want to make a cantor. And I actually think this is a live issue because I mentioned last week that, when I lived in Vegas, one of the cantors of the conservative synagogue, for good or for bad, was basically a Broadway singer who became a cantor and seemed very passionate about the Broadway, not so passionate about the davening, or whatever. Maybe he's very passionate about the davening and I missed the boat. But so the thing is, you think you have a really clear answer, but you don't know the context. Well, next time I'm planning to do Kol Isha Arva, whether the voice of a woman is by its own nature arousing to men and therefore needs to be restricted, women from singing, speaking, and other kinds of things. And the context there you'll find, it seems like maybe there's something clear in the Talmud, except it turns out to be a joke story about two rabbis and has nothing to do with halakha. But if you lift it out by itself, you say, well, look what Rabbi so-and-so said. Not so good for a woman to be talking to a man because it could lead to mixed dancing. So a lot of it has to do with figuring out, don't assume because someone, and this happens online, if you go to like askhalakha.com and all these different places, if you ask a question, you will get a quotation and it'll end the matter. And it's almost always very, very fundamentalist. And that's the problem, which is when someone gives you a pasuk, be careful what they quote. Do you know what the context is? Do you know if the person who the quote comes from, whether they understood what the Talmud was saying? Rabbis can make mistakes. You know how I know? Because there are all these other rabbis who are arguing with them on the page, saying Rashi doesn't get it at all. So here we go for today. So the rabbis taught in Megillah 32a, one who comes to the Torah for an Aliyah opens the Torah scroll, sees the place where one will begin to read, doesn't mention kissing, by the way, but let's put the kiss in there, rolls the scroll to close it, and does the blessing. Okay? And then opens it, and then the reading takes place. Either they read or their proxy reads. So this is Rabbi Meir's position. It is the open, close, bless, open, read. Rabbi Yehuda says, one who comes to the Torah for an Aliyah opens, blesses, and then reads. So you open it, you leave it open, you read, and then it doesn't even say close. So it seems like the scroll is staying open. What's Rabbi Meir's reasoning? This is the Talmud. His reasoning is in accordance with a statement of Ula. For Ula said, why did the prior rabbis say one who reads the Torah should not aid the translator? So now we're getting a piece, like we're trying to figure out, what's the argument here and what's their issue? He's trying to figure out what's the context. Maybe we have a clue from in the older context. We have another thing about worrying about whether people think that the translation is in the Torah. So remember, no one has an Eitz Chaim. The printing press has not been invented. So that, and people don't speak Hebrew in the ancient synagogue, unless you're in the land of Israel. But if you're in Babylonia, you don't speak Hebrew. So the way the service works is person reads from the from the scroll, and then the Meturgaman, the translator, shouts out the Aramaic translation or the local language translation, so that people know what's in the Torah. So if the Meturgaman is standing next to me and shouting out, we're really concerned that people don't think that the translation is in the scroll. The translations tend to be fairly interpretive. Every time you translate something, you make an interpretation, and they include midrashim. I mean, and so just as my father raised me, my father is really a Litvak, so he's very strict. He's not so easygoing with the Chassidut. So as all contemporary conservative rabbis are, like me. And so his attitude is, please be careful when you say the distinguish between a midrash and the text, and also be careful when you say one word comes from another, because the rabbis often are not accurate grammatically. They're giving an interpretation. You know, oh, the word Moshe means to draw out of the water. No, it doesn't. It's that's in the Torah itself. But so we do not want people to think that what the translator is saying is in the Torah. That's a very important barrier to keep. So they're like, you know what? So why is this happening? You're closing the scroll. He must be concerned that people think the blessings are in the scroll, which today is still quoted as a reason for closing the scroll. Rabbi Yehuda, what's going on with his reasoning that you don't close the scroll? He believes that with regard to the translation, it must be that he's like, come on, with regard to the translation, it's possible to err, you know, but with regard to the blessings, it's not possible to err. Why? Because think about it. Not only does everybody know about the blessings, but even if you didn't, that would mean the blessings are all the way through the scroll, right? That all the time it's like Baruch Hu et Adonai Hamvorach, and then an Aliyah, and then Baruch Hu et Adonai Hamvorach, and then Aliyah. No one ever would ever think that the blessings are written a zillion times, 7 times 54, or whatever it is, in the scroll. So it can't possibly. So Rabbi Yehuda is like, yeah, that wouldn't make any sense. So don't worry about closing it. We don't have to worry about people caring about that. And so Rabbi Zera said in the name of Rav Natna, halacha is one who comes to Torah for an Aliyah opens the scroll, sees the place where one begin to read, recites the blessing, and the reading takes place. The scroll is open the whole time. And let him say the halacha is in accordance with Rabbi Yehuda. Rather than repeating the entire state of Rabbi Yehuda, he recites the entire statement because there are those who reverse them. That is, confused which statement was made by Yehuda and which by Meir. So we have Meir is you keep it closed. Yehuda says you leave it open. Rashi, because there are those who revere them. They associate the words of Rabbi Meir with the words of Rabbi Yehuda and the words of Rabbi Yehuda with the words of Rabbi Meir. It is possible to err. What is the error that people will think? One might say the translation is written in the Torah and come to write the translation in the Torah. Okay. But blessings, everyone knows that the blessings are not written in the Torah. Okay. So you can imagine. Here we go. So Rabbi Meir holds that the opening and looking into the Torah scroll, the person having an aliyah should close the scroll prior to the opening, and Rabbi Yehuda does not mention closing the scroll. As we shall see, the majority of opinions understand Rabbi Yehuda to be ruling that the scroll should be kept open during the blessing. Some authorities understand Tosafot, the French commentators on the page, who are also like Rashi trying to understand it and often disagree with Rashi, well, sometimes disagree with Rashi. Some authorities understand the French commentators called Tosafot to imply that while Rabbi Yehuda holds that the scroll may remain open, Rabbi Yehuda would agree that it is best to close the scroll. So even though Rabbi Yehuda says leave it open, some would say, yeah, but he's just saying that, but he really thinks you should close it. According to the Talmud, Rabbi Meir holds that, so Tosafot become a voice for closing the scroll. According to the Talmud, Rabbi Meir holds the scroll should be held closed, is that people would not mistakenly believe the blessings are written in there. Rabbi Yehuda is not concerned about that. The Talmud therefore reaches the understanding Rabbi Meir by extrapolating from what we said earlier. Okay. I would suggest, this is the author of the responsum, I would suggest that perhaps as a practical matter, one misconception is more likely than the other. To my mind, it is more believable that a translation would be written immediately above or below the text. then for the blessings to be written out, as the same blessings would have to be written out repeatedly throughout a large scroll, which among other things would have been considered a significant waste of ink in ancient times. So are we worried about people think the blessings in the scroll, which is something that you might hear a rabbi or someone say, I think the reason we do that is so people don't think the blessings are in there. And the answer is, that's already like, no one would think that. So it comes up and may be quoted, but is that really what's going on? Jerusalem Talmud. So this is not the Bavli, it's the Jerusalem. What is its position, or what's the story? There's a teaching that teaches one who comes to the Torah for an Aliyah opens, sees, rolls the scroll to close it, and then does the Aliyah. And there's another teaching that says one comes to the Torah, opens, sees, blesses, and leaves it open. Rabbi Zura Abba Bar Yimya said the name Rav Matna, said the name Shmuel. The halacha is in accordance with the one who says open, see, and bless. What's the reason? Well, he gives a textual from Nehemiah, and when he opened it, the entire nation stood. And what does it say afterward? And Ezra blessed Lord the God. Therefore, it would have said that they closed it. But specifically, as Nehemiah said, Ezra would open it and read, and it does say closed it, and there we go. So regarding Ezra, the people watched Ezra open and bless with no rolling, and the other rejected position is to avoid thinking the blessings are in the scroll. That's really kind of where we're at. If you look at Sofrim, the minor tractate, you get the two positions, open, see, roll, bless, and open, see, bless. The halacha is open, sees, and blesses. And after reading from the Torah, one rolls it closed and says blessed. So then, okay, Nadav, you're saying leave it open, you do the Aliyah, but at the end of Aliyah, aren't you supposed to close it? Okay, let's leave it open, not necessarily. It seems like an open and shut case. Or is there something we're missing about the context, right? We thought we were talking about in shul, turned out we were talking about in the tavern, right? We think what could I possibly be missing here? Now, Ron knew, because Ron Sussman did an amazing job earlier of doing like everything perfectly, which was really cool. So Ron made a big deal of before he recited the Aliyah, the blessing after, he closed. And so, isn't that what you're supposed to do? Why is it important to close afterward? It wasn't, no one ever, are they talking a lot about closing? It's not coming up a lot. So why is it the thing you have to do? I'm going to go through, these are basically, the Rif is the first, as I've said before, the Rif is the first halachic text, except for scripture. So the Rif takes out the halachic positions of the Talmud and publishes them. And he just says, it's Rabbi Yehuda. You don't close the scroll for the first blessing. And there's no mention of the second blessing. Rambam, Maimonides, Mishnah Torah, open for the first blessing. And you only close for the last blessing. You may know where I'm going through this. If you remember my sermon 2 years ago, the Rippah, one prevents a delay by leaving it open. And this does not apply to after the reading. This is really key. In Jewish law, the idea of preventing a delay becomes paramount. Even the rabbis knew that the Saturday morning service was long, right? They did, and they are and also Monday and Thursdays. People are trying to go to work, and you do not want to extend the Torah service. So kavod hatzibor becomes a super important principle, which means honoring the people in the pews. You honor the people in the pews. What is kavod hatzibor? Sometimes it could mean facing them. So when people come up and say, Rabbi, do you want me to daven facing the ark, or do you want me to daven facing the congregation? You have a choice, because kavod haTorah is you face the Torah, you face the ark, and I love the tradition here. That's the predominant tradition. But let's say I have a bar bat mitzvah child, or anyone, and they say, or I don't know, let's say Ken or Neil, and it says, do you mind if I face? I want to face and see as I'm leading nigunim. You can, because kavod hatzibor. A respect for the public could be to facing them. So you can go either way. Kavod haTorah and kavod hatzibor play a part here. You prevent a tircha on the tzibor. Delays are disrespectful to the people in the pews. And I don't mean just like it would be nice if we didn't delay them. You're required not to delay. So the Rippah's point is some of the discussion was off base. The main thing we have to worry about is the principle of preventing delays. Some people don't know that the first kiss of the Torah would be considered, you're getting an Aliyah, you put your tzitzits in, or your mantle, your belt. More or less, that's halachic. because it's the seeing. You notice there's nothing about seeing afterward. So if you notice that, in general, I don't correct people because you're not supposed to correct people publicly in any way that could show they don't know what they're doing. You just pretend it didn't happen. So I won't correct people in general, but there's no reason to correct someone who forgets to kiss the second time. It's wonderful, but it's optional. One could even say it's an unnecessary delay. So you can see here, the seeing and the kissing would be only for the first time. You don't have to kiss twice. I've noticed here, and I can understand it, there seems to be, it would not be respectful for the next Torah reader to come up while the Torah reader who's reading is just finished, right? And I'm always like, come on up, Ron or Lonnie, just take your place right next to Larry. And I've noticed people are like, oh no, I can't do that until I'm called up. I don't think that's true because there's no requirement that you wait. And if it prevents a delay by coming up and taking your spot, waiting for me to call up the next person, I'm calling up Michael for number 5, you should do it, right? So that would be a delay on the tzibor that's just not necessary. And therefore it's not like it'd be better if you didn't, you really shouldn't. You should take your spot as quickly as possible. Closing the scroll, people lose their places. This must be a problem only in 2022. It's been a problem for 2,000 years, right? So people lose their place. It's really hard to find. Not all of us have perfect eyesight. And it's very important to keep the spot. Many synagogues, and I've been guilty of this myself, although I've always been against it. I've been guilty of allowing it. I know that people put in Post-it notes. Yes. They put in yads, I don't have a text here about the yad, but the truth is nothing should be touching the scroll. Even when you use the yad, it's preferable that the yad doesn't touch the scroll. I mean, is it illegal for the yad to touch? I don't know, but I know it's better, kavod haTorah, not to touch the parchment. And when you kiss, you can put the fringe on the scroll. I don't, I just come near. That's different for the Torah. I do touch the outside, of the cover. The only reason I don't touch the outside cover now is because of COVID, if I'm a little far away. But for the scroll itself, it's perfectly fine not to be touching the scroll. And so therefore, back to this, the issue is that it is certainly preferable for, let's say, who did I just use just now? I said, if Lonnie comes up and takes Larry's yad and stands there at the spot, that's better than putting the yad on the spot and holding it closed. There's just no question halachically. So to me, I mean, everybody can say there are different views. Certainly there are different views on that because I've been in many congregations, if not most, certainly Orthodox, in which you have to roll close because it says you roll close for the second blessing. So you have no choice but to close. And then we'll get to that. I told you today, Tetzaveh was about close. So that's really the climax. The Rashba says one closes at the end, so the Torah shouldn't be open without being read. And that's true, it's disrespectful. So now we have a whole new set, which is the really relevant set of principles. Don't cause a delay. People losing their spot, anything that's making the Torah service longer is halakhically wrong. But you also have an issue, which is you are not supposed to leave the Torah scroll open without being read. And that is why we cover it. If I say something like, you know what? I want to talk about a word that's in the next Aliyah, and you see Ron Sussman, run for the cover and put it on top. Or if we do the Mishaberach between Aliyah, we cover it. That's exactly true. It's disrespectful to have the Torah open without being read. The question is, does that really apply to during the blessings between Aliyot? My position, I think it's the correct halacha position is, it does not apply there. So that we got too fussy about covering the scroll and we thought it, but when I'm calling up one and Meg just had her Aliyah and she's going off and calling up the other one, the idea that we have the scroll open, no. The idea that we're going to fuss to cover it while we call someone else up and then open it and then close it, like this is a mistake under the principle of you don't leave it open without being read, that you've gone way too far. And so, but that's a lot of where it comes from. Don't let people think the blessings are in the Torah, and you can't have the Torah open without being read. So we've got to keep closing it over and over and over again. That's really where all of this comes from. Okay, and then the Meiri. All these are famous medieval and later halakhic authorities. Though we roll the scroll closed during the closing lesson, it is acceptable not to, since there is no danger, as we have established, that people will think the blessings are in the scroll. And from Kobo, which deals with the laws of the service and the halachot of it, The reader stands and opens the scroll to see what one will read in it, and rolls the scroll closed and blesses. But some say that the reader should not roll it, but rather one opens and sees and blesses, and thus it's the opinion of Rambam. And there are those to say there is reason for him to turn his head so that it does not appear as if the blessings are written in the Torah. And afterwards, that is after the Torah is read, the reader rolls the scroll closed and blesses the blessing recited after it. So if you do not have all the sources before you, you see there's a lot of, you can close it, you can not close it, there's a reason, there's the blessings, do you not show the blessings? So then you actually have two different traditions. Actually, if you're doing it the way I want you, what you want me to do, Rav Nadav. So I want you to do what Ron did, which is you're coming up for your Aliyah, you kiss, you hold on to the, I think it's enough to hold on one, but he was, ideally, you hold on to both, but you don't get in the way, you don't block out the person from seeing their spot, and you hold it, and now there are two traditions. One is you should look at the text and do the blessings if you know them by heart, and it goes all the way back to the Talmud and then gets repeated and quoted about looking to the left. So the left seems to be here, and it's the text, because we go with those who hold that no one's going to assume the blessings are in there. And then there's the whole tradition, which is whatever you do, don't look at the text. You hold it open and you look at the blessings, which is what I do. And Ron was doing, well, then Ron switched because he was obviously intentionally trying to show both are acceptable. I always look to the right and I go with that tradition, which is no one should think that the blessings are written in the scroll, and both are equally valid. So you end up with different traditions when you go to different synagogues. And we're getting toward the end. So Moshe Isserlis, the main Ashkenazic decisor, who's later commentator on the Shulchan Aruch, I mean contemporaries with Yosef Karo, but tends to go for the strict Ashkenazic positions we've come to know and love, even when they're more strict than what comes previously. And when one blesses the first blessing, one should turn one's face to the side so as not to appear to be blessing by reading text in the blessing of the Torah. And it seems to me that one should turn one's face to the left. So that caused a lot of trouble because you turn it to the side, but to the left. But like we've been coming up from this side of the bima for what seems like a really long time. So like everyone's like Isserlis is telling us in the commentary of the Shulchan Aruch, you look to the left, isn't that the scroll? I'll leave it open, but just like that's no pun intended, I'll leave it open. But that's where part of the issues come from. The Bach and the Taz says, don't look at the scroll, look at the blessings. Others say it doesn't matter. The Vilna Gaon says, whatever, just the predominant principle is don't do a bother on the public by causing delays. It should be as fast and smooth as possible. That's one of the reasons that I often have ideas about what's in that I'd love to tell you there's an interesting word coming up and I don't, because it's a delay. I know you think I probably talk too long. Everyone I'm sure thinks I do, but like I try to pick my spots so that if you're there for the Torah reading, you don't hear a lot. And even like, I don't even do a big pre-thing. I mean, I think I was taught in rabbinical school or whatever, before we do the Torah service, tell us what we're going to read. And I always feel like I just want to save my comments for later. So there's a way in which let's just keep going. Let's move it along. And I take it seriously. Okay. Now the Mishnah. Mishnah is before any of this, right? It's before pre-Talmudic, pre-everything. The ones who open and seals, that is, who begin and end the reading of the Torah, bless before and after it. The Talmud asks, what's going on here? Well, it was taught the one who opens, that is, has the first Aliyah to the Torah, blesses before it, and the one who seals, that is, has the last Aliyah, blesses after it. But now that each person has an Aliyah and they make both blessings, this is the reason the rabbis enacted the new system of each person saying the blessings. A decree because of those who enter and leave, lest one who enters late believe that no blessing is made on reading from the Torah. So they are trying to construct the context. Some of you may have remembered it from 2 years ago. There's only one in the Mishnaic times. This is the context like the tavern that we missed. There was only one set of blessings. You did the blessing before the first Aliyah. You only did Asher Natan Lanu Torat Emet. You only did that after the seventh Aliyah. So it was parenthesis 1, the entire reading with all the different people. So let's say Larry had number 3. It would be presumed that Larry's reading number 3, right? In Mishnaic times, Larry was the reader, and he didn't do a blessing if he was number 3. If you were number 1, you did the opening blessing. If you were number 7, you did the closing blessing. And now it explains the person who reads, at least if I leave it open at the beginning, a lot of people today will say, but I'm I'm Aliyah number 3. So after the reading takes place, I am going to close it and hold it, and then say, the problem with that is we've now lost the spot. And that means the next person comes up, we go through the whole thing. Was I paying attention? Was the second Gabbai paying attention? Does this person have the spot? Do they have to look back in the time, remember what the first word is? Did someone leave the yad on it? So when they rolled it closed, and then the yad slides down and scrapes the Torah. And so, but they're doing the right thing because they learned at one point, and many Orthodox synagogues today still do, you better close that scroll for both, because you close the scroll the first time because you don't want any, you don't leave the scroll open if you're not reading from it. And that goes too far. And certainly you do it the second time because it's clear from the texts, except the texts are based on the idea that when it says you close after the blessing, they only mean at the very end of the reading. So Ron modeled it correctly today, where he very dramatically, and I loved it, he closed before he did the last blessing, and that's because he was the maftir. After that, we close the scroll and we dress it. So what do you do today? Well, we've learned some things. One is that when people come up and they say, we follow the halakha custom of leaving the Torah scroll open while reciting the blessing, they don't like that and they close it anyway, just like a lot of people still stand for Kaddish, even if it's not minhag hamakom to stand for Kaddish. They're just, well, I went to day school, so I know better. And so I'll do it. And there's an issue with that I brought up in the sermon, which is what the rabbis say is when you're not going to go with minhag hamakom, and you're going to publicly take in front of everyone a more stringent view, even if it's the view you believe in, you don't know whether people will not know whether you're doing it out of sincere piety or whether you're showing off. And therefore, you should go with minhag hamakom. Now, you can choose to say, I'm sorry, but my dad raised me to always stand for the Kaddish. I'm going to do it even if no one else is standing. And you're allowed, because you're allowed to say, I follow the tradition of my father. You're allowed to say, I follow the tradition of the place where I'm born. You're allowed. But the halakha authorities say, you have to understand you'll be viewed as having yohara, which is arrogance, because you're showing that you know better. So I used it with a sermon about the Joseph story, because we never know if Joseph is bragging. I'm the best. Look at me. I'm handsome. All the ladies like me. And I got the dream saying I'm going to rule over you. Or if he's just being sincere, he's just trying to do what God's asking him to do. So I related it to this issue. But at the end of the day, I hope I've made the case that as long as Rav Nadav doesn't start doing the Mishnah Berach for the sick, or starts talking about how much he just loves what Moses is about to say in the next Aliyah, the truth is, the person opens, they kiss the first Aliyah, and at that point on, that scroll remains open. And if you're going to hold for the second blessing, whether you look in the scroll to the right or to the left, like Isserless, whatever that means, that scroll remains open. The next reader should definitely be there, because any delay is just unnecessary. It's just unnecessary. It's like today, let's have a moment of silence. Not allowed during the Torah service. That would be the delay of like, you're closing it because we don't want to have it open and not read it. But what you're really doing is doing exactly what you shouldn't be doing, which is delaying the reading of the Torah and embarrassing people publicly. So that's what it should be. It should be open. The seventh Aliyah, or I should say maftir. At the maftir Aliyah, today we have the maftir added in. In the Mishnah, there was no maftir. So now that we have the maftir Aliyah, then the maftir should hold it open. It's read. Now we know we're all done reading it. Then they close it. And we close. So that is, yep. I'm sorry. They close it and they say that. And then as soon as they're done, it is bring up Hagba and Galila. So Eileen, and I'm also going to take this off and look at my chat areas. Let me just stop my share. And Ron's, okay, go ahead, Eileen. And I'll repeat the question for you online.
Because Ron made me feel comfortable on the Ron did teach us for preparing purpose, and so it was actually always for the second lesson, we always close the Torah and top the Torah. So that's one. So this feels a little counter to that. But also, a synagogue I went to in another place had this really cool silver little oval with a space in the middle that they would place on the spot each time. And so that way, you can close the Torah, hold the spot, and you can tuck away. And I think that's really elegant. I'd love to try to find one of those.
Sure. So two things. One is, the second one is Eileen pointed out that she was at a shul, and I see Jason was nodding, that had like a silver thing that, like a paperweight.
It's like a paperweight.
That a paperweight, and so it keeps the spot. So what I would say is two things. One is it probably wouldn't work here because everything slides down, and it's really hard on me. I'm trying to think about whether on this table I can put up like some kind of like sticky stickers, because my Siddur and my Chumash are always sliding down into the person doing on the Aliyot. And so it might be a problem because of the slope of this table. The other thing is I would have to research, and I haven't done it. I mean, I don't think I've ever done it, but I've learned it. I would have to research, what are the rabbinic debates about touching the scroll at all? Is it really okay, or is it really to be avoided? So that would be an issue around the paperweight. And Michael.
Yeah. So,
Oh, wait, can I go back? You also said second Aliyah, you were trained by Ron?
Well, for second blessing, Ron, so always open on the first and always close on the second, always open.
So, Eileen was just saying that, she's been trained, and even here, that you can see why from the sources, it's certainly an established tradition to close for the second blessing. My idea that you don't close until it's the end of the whole reading, I admit I'm probably in the minority of that custom. And partly that's because, so I'm really glad you brought it up. So most people see it, you leave it open, even if we go with Rabbi Yehuda and not Rabbi Meir, which most do, leave it open. Although I don't know where people got to, I guess I should, I don't know about you. It seems like everywhere I go, and always when we have visitors, they got to close for both. And I'm always like, really? And I've seen it so many places, and I'm like, that came out of this, but certainly it's understandable that people see open during the first, close at the end. Although, as you see, even in Rabbi Yehuda, it never says it doesn't say to close. And so that's
Open it without opening it. That's what I was thinking in here.
interesting.
Open the Torah, but it's got to be closed before you open it.
Also, it's not clear that they had as many readers as we have today.
Yeah.
But that's why I take the position, even if it's a minority position, I take the position to leave it open, like in the Mishnah. But I'm glad you pointed that out, Eileen, because I don't think that's the common understanding. So I gave you the historical framework, and I'd like decising really with the most open historical perspective I can. And so thank you for pointing that out. And Michael.
yeah, so the question is about the blessing and looking at the Torah during the blessing. I thought there's something that you're not supposed to be saying these blessings by heart. You're supposed to be looking at the blessing. So is it really, and of course we know the blessings out of the Torah. This, sorry, my second comment, it's like, who thinks that they wrote the whole translation of the Torah? Anybody that comes more than 1 week knows that's not the case, or the blessing. But what about the first part of my question? Like looking at the Torah and saying the blessing by heart.
So I'm going to go to the second part first, which was just really quick, which is the issue of thinking the translation might be in the scroll. Even that's weird. But remember, without a book, if I added in just a typical Targum thing, like in Breshit, throwing in Satan, when this happened, Satan told Eve, wait, was it a serpent or was it Satan? That you wouldn't want people to think that the midrash that the serpent is Satan is actually in there. So the translations could be interpreted. So it makes sense if no one has a book and no one speaks Hebrew, that they might be fooled. But the other part is, you said that, and I could be misstating it, isn't it the case that there's a principle that we don't do things by memory when it comes to tefillah? And that is a separate topic. I didn't prepare for today because I always want to be, as Rashi says, always teach yourself to say, I'm not sure. And I don't know. And I'm very humble about halakha, because how many times have I thought I knew what the answer was, and then you realize it's a longer story. But in this case, there is, I would say that's part of the larger discussion of, is it wrong to memorize and disrespectful to daven from memory rather than to always daven from the words? And that is a halachic question. that in general, it's better to daven the Amidah, especially the Amidah, tefillah, so you do not make a mistake. You do not want to make a mistake in the Amidah. So it is not good to do the Amidah by heart. Then again, one thing you see here is they're like, sure, you can not look at if you know the blessings, just say them, but from memory. In fact, some of the deciders say that's better to do than to look at them, which means that not for everything do you have to look. So I obviously do the Chatzi Kaddish frequently by heart. And one of the reasons I do that is I don't want to waste your time by getting out the book that I leave over there and opening up to the Chatzi Kaddish. One of the reasons I moved the Mishaberach for Cholim, for the sick, to the break we already have is straight up about the Tircha on the Tzibor, to speed up the service. My attitude is anytime we can stop with opening and closing and moving around. So my attitude is, we're closing it we do have to cover the scroll. We have to create a hafsaka, a break between number 7 and number 8. That's required. Actually, the Chatzi Kaddish is only for that purpose, really. Again, teach myself to say, I don't know. Maybe there's a source that the Chatzi Kaddish is for a different purpose because we just learned Torah. It's to provide the break. So my attitude is, we already have a break. I'll do the blessing for the sick. So I don't like to do it after number 1. But the answer is that no, you are allowed to do blessings. How many of us light candles with your eyes closed? How many of us do Havdalah with, by heart? Are you allowed to go to camp? Do you have to be passing out books to do it the right way to make sure everyone's looking at it? So I think that my memory is that the Amidah is different, but many things you don't have to do you may do by heart. Larry.
So I have 2 questions. The first one is just probably about what you just said about reading it in the text. What about before the 14th or 15th century, when there were no printing presses, or books that were available were very rare? Most people couldn't afford to own a book.
That's so true. There was a matter of economic equity, because even after they invented the printing press, could you afford to have them? I'm looking here. There's another thing, like Ron points out. I think you're pointing out, Ron, is it's so hard for me to know where to look. I don't know how Jimmy Fallon does it. So, one thing I don't do is when we have 2 scrolls, I don't make everyone stand up when I take one scroll and put it next to the other scroll. Because I just feel like you're standing up, and then there's this and there's that, especially if because we're then doing the Chatzi Kaddish. That would mean everyone rise. We're just moving it a few feet. Then you sit, unless you want to stay stood for the Chatzi Kaddish. Anyway, so there are times where I'm trying to speed things along and move it, that some people are like, I think he wasn't supposed to do it that way. But what I'm doing is I'm trying to keep that rhythm going fast. I shouldn't hold forth. You probably heard me say it before, but the word Haggadah, Pesach is coming up, means an oral telling, just like the word Agadah. So it was presumed that no one had a Haggadah book.
Right. So where does this requirement come from that you're supposed to read it in the book when nobody had books?
You're right. That's a good question. Since prayer books only started in the Gaonic period. I don't know. I told you it's not fresh on my mind. I wonder where it comes from. And I wonder, that would be a great lesson. Just look, what are they getting out of the Talmud that says you should look and not make a mistake? I know the later halachot, one sidor, Penine halacha, the laws of prayer, Mishnah Berurah, when you already have a book. So good question about how does it extend before there were any books. But you should know that once the printing press was invented, chumashim were not the big thing to sell. What was the big thing to sell was you can get by with one chumash or none, but you can't get by without Haggadot and Sidors. So one thing that happened is the first thing in Judaism was let's print Haggadot for people. And then it became it kind of like there's an equity issue. Rich people have Haggadot for the Seder. And then it became that you should do it like it's in the Haggadah. And then I'm sort of anti, because it's my little historical stand. You guys know I've got my idiosyncrasies, every rabbi does. I really think like many people, I'm happy just to put the Haggadah away at the Pesach Seder. The reason you have the order and recite the order is so you know what to do without a book. You can just tell the story, what the halachot from the Torah are, which is maror and motzi matzah. And and so like you kind of know what you're doing. You know the halakha from the Torah about the 4 children and what you need to say to them, and you can use your own words. So unfortunately, there became a fixation on Haggadot and what you need to do, and you need to read all the rabbinic material in it and get through it. And that became a way to sell Haggadot, which ones had more in it, and then Sidors. Sidors started with, in the Gaonic period, they got bigger and bigger and bigger. And then once they got bigger and bigger and bigger, if you took anything out, you were a bad person because, whoa, you're so great that you can skip page 93. And it had to do partly with, I would say, there's partly issue of commerce and the publication of books and how many pages you get in the Siddur. We actually now have the prayer for Israel. So, you got to have it. Go ahead.
I had a second question.
Oh, sure. I'm sorry. And I'm just,
is there a custom for approaching and leaving the Bema? So you said most people come up from this side. Is this just a Beth Israel thing?
Yeah.
Or is there like a universal custom that you approach the Bema from one side and leave from another side?
So this is the deal. The universal rule is take the short way up and the long way down. Okay. Now, that said, it is acceptable that, especially like, let's say my Bema in San Diego, it was built that this was a little shorter and this was a little longer. So even if you were sitting there, you could say, I'm coming up the short way by coming up on that side and going back on that way. So you can either go by the principle of, I'm sitting there, the shortest way is directly here, or there are places where the right thing to do is you always enter from that side. So you'll notice that Rabbi Daberson used to stand here, and I switched to there because I've never been in a synagogue where Gabbai Rishon wasn't there. Every synagogue I've ever been in, but people come up, and so it is customary that you come up from that side and you go down that side. In a place where we have a beautiful theater on the round, it can be superseded by coming up the middle. Often, many bimas don't have a middle you can come up. So I would say that to answer Larry, the prevailing custom is you do come up on that side, and Gabbai Rishon is on that side, and the blessings are right where they're here, and the second Gabbai is over here, and it's only because the structure of this that should you choose to come up directly, that's okay, because you rush to get up there and you are reluctant to leave the presence of the Torah. And so that's the principle. Correct. That's right. That's right. The Torah reader is always on the left, my left, and the reader, the blesser is always on the right. That's correct.
If a custom prevails, does that include for all reading and davening? Or just during those blessings?
Just for the Torah, because the rule relates to the fact that you should be zealous to be near in the presence of the Torah and reluctant to leave it. So during davening, it wouldn't matter where you come up from. Absolutely. I asked Rabbi Daberson why. Of course, I'm a pretty shy guy, and I totally respect Rabbi Daberson's authority, and he knows so much more than I do. And so, it took me a couple of years to ask him, Rabbi Daberson, why over there? And he's like, oh, that's where the microphone is. So it's really easy for me to go, hey, everybody, I have something to say about verse 2. And I was like, oh, okay. So then, of course, I called a whole, the old joke about the right way to go up to the bima is you go like this, then you go like this, then you go like this, and then you go like this. Why is that the right way? Only the person at the Altakakar in the shul at the back said, oh, there used to be a pillar right there. And so everyone had to walk around it. Now that the pillar's gone, you still make the loop. So that's one of the reasons you'll see me move the microphone from there to where I'm at. And then I get to speak in there. Of course, that was after 2 visits from the audio contractors who's like, could we put another microphone in this? Ooh, we could do anything for the right amount of money. You know what I mean? And I was like, oh yeah, I know contractors. I'll just slide this one over. And so that's where that came from. So I want to thank you everyone for your attention. And I really appreciate, I know that ritual matters like this are not always for everyone. I appreciate it.
Part of the reason I like reading Hazinu, it's there. It doesn't
Yeah.
matter when you come up.
I just want to say, Michael was saying, it's really nice when you read sections that are easy to find. And I've been reading Torah since I was a kid, but it can be really hard to find things in a column. So, one of the things that Meg does for me, God bless her heart, is every week, she said to me this morning, I walked in, okay, open your tikkun. It's gonna be right there, over there, and right there, 6 lines up. And it's just great. I know where we start. But then to lose the spot, especially in those sections where there are a million ayils and a million kebeses, you got so many ewes and lambs, and you got to know where you're at. So I would like it to be left open all the way through, and for people to take their spots. Shabbat shalom, everybody. Thanks for learning something obscure and wonderful and beautiful, and the variety of how we derive our rituals. Take care. Shabbat shalom.
First time I read Torah was without the
Mm-hmm.
What's the difference in meaning? So it's power.
So, all right. It all depends on the context of the syllables and where they go. So I don't think there's any difference in meaning. I think there's just, I think it's just for the poetic rhythm of it, and whether there's a closed syllable or an open syllable before.
Oh, so it's really the flow. So if you do a the or a u, it has to do with it. Is it the or u the?
Right.
It's better. It's u
The u is if you have a Shavah afterward. And today, one of the readers did an u where it said the, and I didn't correct because then I only correct for meaning. And so the meaning was, but yeah,
I'm very loose with that. In my reading, I don't pay on the vavim before a word, the beginning of the word. I'm just very loosey-goosey with it. I just do it from whatever.
Right, if someone says, my parents are Abraham and Nechama, they'll always say Abraham v'Nechama, but Nechama means it's actually Abraham u'Nechama. Or my mother's Devorah, which also has a Shabbat Devorah, so it's u'Devorah. But and what I'm saying is it doesn't matter. Everyone knows vid Devorah means and Devorah.
So the Harothet and Harothet, they mean the same thing.
They really do.
Just have to do it.
How about what? One of the famous questions? Mi chamocha, belim Adonai, mi chamocha. So one has it, and there's no difference in meaning. Yeah, but it has to do with, but my dad's better at that. It has to do with open syllables and closed syllables. I was trying to explain that to my kids at one point, open syllables and closed syllables in English to help their spelling. And even I got befuddled.
So this is great.
Oh,
for
thanks.
Anybody, like a session for everybody who reads Torah.
Yeah.
Because honestly, I would never study ever. And I was telling Aliyah just now, I closed it before and after, and I was feeling resistance up here.
Well, yeah, I'd rather stay open.
And now I get it.
Oh, you felt it. Yeah, no.
Yeah.
And you're right. For example, no one ever taught it to me. I just studied it because I was like, what's going on? And, but I do think, and I talked to Meg about it, that partly the coronavirus threw us for a loop. But before that, we were holding regular sessions just on how to do an Aliyah, how to be a Gabbai, how to do a Haggadah. And we're going to start those up again.
That's
And and because they were really well attended, they're fun. They don't take long. And so we're going to make this a regular thing of it. And I'll try to be more explicit about, I try to be more explicit about, I'd like the scroll left open.
And actually it dawned on me when I was talking to Babette that when we learn with Ron, he's teaching our kids, and our kids' first Aliyah is the maftir. So I absorb, so to me, what Ron told me to do, or told, each of my 3 kids in my presence, was what I, the open, hold, then, all the kissing, and I'm always I'm watching, did Ron someone forgot what Ron taught them, and then close, but maybe it's because it's maftir and I just absorbed that, that's what
I
you
think
do
it's
for every
also me.
Aliyah.
I think it's also me. In
No,
other
but
words,
I didn't know,
because you're right,
I
it is
thought
a
it was supposed to
minority,
close
but
it.
I'm taking a different style, which is
Yeah.
I'd like it left open. Whereas the standard is,
To
the standard is either close or open
Open
and close.
Yeah.
And so I know that I'm a little off here. So,
Yeah.
and also, as Ron says to me sometimes, whoa, new sheriff in town.
And
And whenever he says that, though, I usually backtrack because I don't want to mess with people's traditions.
Yeah, yeah.
I'd like to do one on standing for Kaddish. I mean, that's also something
I
I've
have to say
researched.
that's a
No,
huge
I was
pet
gonna
peeve
ask,
of mine.
are you calling me out for that?
No,
I'm one
You're
of the,
not the only
no,
one. You're
there's
not
a
the
few
only
because I'm one of the
one.
people who stands.
You are.
No.
And
You know what?
I'll tell you,
I'm
I'll
not
tell you
calling
the
out
story
on purpose.
behind
I
it.
mean, I was thinking of a recent bar
I
mitzvah
know,
Okay.
but it's a
where
mid-
like
I'm like,
a whole roast.
Yeah.
And often what people, sometimes what and maybe it's my own perception, but like my body language, there are people who stand like you.
Yeah.
And I hope you don't mind. I don't notice it. But there are people who like will be in the second row and they'll stand and they'll just stare at me like, no respect. Oh yeah, absolutely. I just devoted my whole life to Torah because I have no respect for it. You know,
And maybe
absolutely.
that's not even what they mean, but it feels that way.
It
from what
feels
you're-
that way,
And I
right.
have to say, like, for me.
Well, you know, in a way,
It
that-
feels that way. Like, I hear what you're saying, like Babette's saying it feels uncomfortable to her not to stand.
right.
For me, I feel uncomfortable that there are, because of like, it's this minhag, like, and it's not halachic, so like, why are people standing? So it's
It-
actually
yeah.
interesting what you.
I mean, the
say.
rabbis are smart. I mean, they're not just smart, but like, they're not stupid. They may be stupid about women sometimes, but they're not stupid about human nature. But it's true. I mean, they're right, which is, how is someone supposed to know you're not trying to tell them they're wrong?
Right.
If you're doing in a minority thing, and they're like, look, it's up to you. I mean, you could just
Yeah.
say this is important for me to do.
Right.
But you're right. I mean, and I'll go over it. There are clearly two positions on standing for the
Oh, for
Kaddish.
sure.
I have never heard you
Yeah.
about it.
Oh, I'm looking
I
forward
mean,
to it. No, I never have.
Okay.
I never, but I never have.
Yeah.
No.
but it would be, yeah, why not?
It would be an
Exactly. And it might
interesting-
just help people
I think
understand.
it would be
You know, part is
interesting.
that sometimes people feel like what they grew up with is, the right thing. I mean, I've had people here saying it does rub me the wrong way. I'm trying to deal with my own reactivity. Someone will say, well, you're really not doing it the right way. And I'll say, oh, like, show me the source. I grew up at Shine. So.
Yeah, right.
And I'm like,
where
oh,
you grew up.
yes, I didn't know. I mean, oh my God. So it's like, we grow up with something, we're
Right,
sure
we're
it's the
sure
right
that's the
way.
right way. Yeah.
And it's hard. I mean,
Yeah.
especially if we've seen it other places.
Yeah.
But so I look forward to teaching that and also but I also don't mean to call people out. Obviously there are people who do it, but it is a little hard. If you're like behind someone who does it, you're staring at someone's butt, like 4 or 5 more times than you would. There are 7 Kaddishes in the Saturday morning service. It's a lot, but the basic rule is that for the most part, people did not stand for Kaddish unless if you're going to stand for the Baruch, you stand for the Kaddish before, because what basically happens, people were starting early to
Right.
stand for the Baruch. The Baruch is so short, you don't want to be late for it. Right? You
Right.
don't want to be like, I don't be like, I'm talking to Meg. Oh no, I just missed the Baruch and it's already over and I didn't stand. So that you stand, that's when we started Yishtabach. If you've done Baruch She'amar, if you didn't do Pesukei de Zimra, you don't stand at Yishtabach. That's a rule. But you always stand for the Kaddish before. So you can
And the
couple
Kaddish before the
Kaddishes.
Musaf Amida,
Right.
because you're gonna go right into the Amida.
Right, so, the Chatzi Kaddish before the Amida, and Musaf, that's why I say,
Musaf,
please
Musaf,
rise,
Yeah,
because it's coupled together.
Yeah.
But for example, a big one would be Kaddish Shalem at the end of the Amidah, right? You've already sat, you've listened to the repetition. Eileen's then Yikadal V'Kadash. Do I have to stand back up? And there are people who pop up, or there are people who stay stood. But then I'm also like, are you still? I mean, today I'm still davening, just waiting because you stand for the Kaddish. And the origin of standing really is Kabbalistic, because the Ari, we're already talking really late in the spot. They're so into their davening that they wouldn't be sitting. And the origin seems to be that for standing for the Kaddish Shalem would be that you don't sit when your rabbi or your master. I mean, I'm not your master. I'm just your rabbi. You know what I mean? You don't sit when the master is standing. You always, yes. Or something like that. I mean, I didn't know this. So the master is giving a shiur. I guess they give a shiur sitting down. I mean, I'm standing. So that there became a thing where you wouldn't sit. So then it became you stood, and they're already doing Kaddish Shalem.
yeah.
But the Kabbalistic masters are still dominating because they're Devakas. So there was a thing about that. But I think I gave you all the sweet
Very
tidbits.
cool. That's very good.
That's
Can I ask
right.
a very quick question about the scholar in residence, which
Yeah, sure.
I'm going to try
I
to
know.
stay. I'm going to try and stay in town Thursday night at least to drive in on Friday. It has to do with like my kids and who wants to be there to work on Friday, but I'm going to try and make it happen.
I would love it.
I would really love to be there Thursday night, but for the other ones that are being streamed.
Yeah.